I pretended not to remember my own name when my daughter yelled, "Mom, where's the deed to the house?" I just stared at her and mumbled, "Who are you again?" That was the moment it all started. My name is Evelyn Grace Whitmore, an 85-year-old retired art professor from Vermont. I've got wavy shoulder-length blonde hair, wear vintage sweaters, and I keep my home neat as a pin. I might be old, but I'm not dumb. Not anymore. Because that day, when I first faked memory loss, was the day I stopped being their puppet. You see, my children, Richard and Jessica, had been circling me like vultures for months. Ever since my husband passed, they started visiting more often, not to check on me, but to assess my condition, as they called it. The kind of concern that always came with clipboards, calculators, and whispered hallway conversations about selling the house and liquidating assets. They thought I was losing my mind. They weren't wrong. Not because of dementia, but because of grief. Losing Walter, my husband of 56 years, cracked something inside me. He was my safe place. He protected me from their greed. He taught me how to be sharp, how to be strong. But after he was gone, I didn't speak much. I barely left my bedroom. That silence, unintentionally, convinced them I was slipping. So I leaned in. I stopped making my bed. I left cereal boxes in the fridge. When Jessica brought her friend from the assisted living facility to evaluate me, I sat on the couch in mismatched shoes and clapped at the ceiling fan. It was all part of the plan. But I didn't expect them to be so fast. By day 9 of my memory loss, they were signing paperwork. By day 12, they had a room reserved for me at Sunrise Hills Nursing Estate, the one that smelled like microwaved broccoli and bleach. By day 14, they took my phone away. But here's what they didn't know. They didn't know about the small key I had stitched into the lining of my housecoat. They didn't know what it opened. They didn't know what was inside the antique wooden wardrobe in my attic. And they definitely didn't know that hidden inside my wardrobe was $4.1 million in cash, wrapped in grocery bags, tucked behind old dresses and baby blankets. Why? Because Walter didn't trust banks. He ran an art trade business that dealt with antique collectors. And before he died, he whispered, "Don't ever tell them. Promise me, Eve. They'll devour you for it." And he was right. Because now, I was being wheeled into a white van by two strangers in matching polos, and my daughter, my own flesh and blood, was standing on my porch signing away my freedom. But I didn't say a word. I just blinked up at her and asked, "Have we met before?" She smiled smugly and said, "Don't worry, Mom. You'll be safe now." I watched from the rearview mirror as my house disappeared into the distance. They thought they won. They thought I was gone. But I still had the key. And I had exactly 40 days to outsmart them before they found the wardrobe. And then everything would explode. I didn't cry when they dropped me off at Sunrise Hills. I didn't scream. I didn't protest. I just stared out the window like a tired old woman and muttered, "Where's Walter? He said we were going for ice cream." That line hit the nurse in the heart. She reached over, patted my shoulder, and said, "Oh, sweetie, you've had a long day." I blinked twice, just enough to squeeze out a fake tear. The room they gave me had soft yellow walls, a twin bed with stiff floral sheets, and one window that faced a brick wall. There was a security camera above the door and a call button beside the bed. I made a mental note of both. A woman in the next room kept shouting, "Where's my daughter?" over and over again. Her voice cracked like old wood. It echoed in the hallway. I whispered back, "Probably out spending your money too." I had 40 days. That was the amount of time written in the medical file Jessica forgot to lock before she handed it to the nurse. I saw it. A trial period, they called it. If I didn't improve mentally in 40 days, they'd get full authority to sell the house, my house, and move my things into long-term storage. That was code for auction. I smiled inside. They were greedy. But they were also impatient, and that made them sloppy. What they didn't realize is that old women like me have time. Time to think. Time to observe. And now I had nothing but time. I played dumb. I poured salt into my coffee. I asked what year it was, twice. I told a nurse I was married to Ronald Reagan. But at night, I lay awake, rehearsing every step I'd need to take to get that money to safety. The wardrobe was locked. Only the small brass key I had sewn into the hem of my nightgown could open it. The wardrobe was too heavy to move, too valuable to leave. Inside were rolled bills, real estate deeds, and a small stack of bearer bonds Walter collected from his old art clients, stuff even the IRS probably forgot existed. But I couldn't go back home. Not yet. Jessica had changed the locks. Richard had put up surveillance cameras. I knew that because I overheard them bickering about the installation cost on a speakerphone call one morning while they thought I was napping. So I waited. And I watched. That morning, I sat in the rec room faking confusion over a jigsaw puzzle. An older man named Arnold wheeled himself next to me and said, "You're not as loopy as you look." I froze. He leaned in, his voice raspy and low. "I used to be an attorney. I know the look of someone faking it." I swallowed. "And what exactly do you plan to do with that information, Arnold?" He shrugged. "Nothing. Unless you need a friend." It was the first honest conversation I'd had in months, so I told him pieces of it. Enough to make him curious, but not enough to make me vulnerable. I said I had something precious hidden, something my family didn't know about, and they were trying to lock me away before they could find it. Arnold listened. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded and said, "Let me guess, cash in the walls? Under the floorboards?" I smiled. "Something like that." He tapped his head. "You've got about 30 days left, Evelyn. If they file for full guardianship, you'll never see the outside of this place again." That's when I decided I'd need help. Jessica came to visit. She brought me a fruit basket and sat by my bed, scrolling on her phone while pretending to keep me company. I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "The bird flew off with the watch." She blinked. "What?" "The bird. He flew off. Took the watch from under the mattress." I whispered like it was top secret. She rolled her eyes. "Mom, what are you even talking about?" But she left that day more paranoid than she arrived. I knew because later that evening, I overheard her yelling at Richard on speakerphone, "I think she's hiding something. What if Dad left her something we don't know about?" Good. Let them panic. Let them start searching where nothing exists. It would keep them distracted. Meanwhile, Arnold had a cousin, Leon, who visited once a week. A quiet man, mid-60s, drove a delivery truck and owed Arnold a few favors from back in the day. I slipped him a note on day 11. On it was a map of my attic. The instructions were clear. Open the wardrobe. Use the key. Wait for the next step. Leon nodded silently. He didn't ask why an 85-year-old woman was giving him a treasure map. He just tucked the note into his jacket and left with his delivery bag. But on day 13, something unexpected happened. I was eating bland mashed potatoes in the dining hall when Nurse Rita pulled me aside. "Evelyn," she said, "your son called. He wants to schedule a full psychological evaluation before next week." I faked a blink. "Did he bring cookies?" She sighed. "No, sweetie. He's bringing a lawyer." A lawyer? That wasn't part of the plan. Were they trying to expedite the guardianship? I had less time than I thought. I returned to my room that night in a panic. My hands shook. The old feelings crept in. Powerlessness, despair, fear. But then I felt the cold metal of the key sewn into my nightgown hem. I clutched it hard. I wasn't helpless. I was just getting started. I had 27 days. And the next morning, the wardrobe was gone. The wardrobe was gone. I could feel my heart pounding in places I didn't know still had life. My mouth went dry. My knees buckled. If I had been standing, I might have collapsed. Leon had taken it. He was supposed to open it, not remove it. I paced my tiny nursing home room with the energy of a woman 30 years younger. My slippers scraped against the linoleum floor like a metronome of dread. I sat. I stood. I pressed the nurse call button, then canceled it before anyone came. What if Jessica found him? What if the neighbors saw him hauling out a century-old wardrobe in broad daylight? What if he opened it and got greedy? The cash. The deeds. The bonds. Everything Walter and I built in silence for decades, it was all packed into that wardrobe. And now it was missing. At 3 a.m., I slipped a napkin under my pillow with one line scribbled in pencil. Check Leon's truck. Confirm safe delivery. Use the code phrase, sunflower tea. I passed it to Arnold the next morning over prune juice. He didn't say a word. Just gave me a subtle nod. God bless that man. Jessica showed up again. This time in a business suit, not yoga pants. And she wasn't alone. A woman in thick glasses and a stiff bun followed her, a legal assistant or therapist, maybe both. Jessica leaned in close. Mom, this is Dr. Camille. She's going to talk to you for a few minutes, okay? I put on my best blank stare and whispered, Do you know where my pet goose is? The woman wrote something down. Jessica looked smug. The interview began. Name, date, current president. I flubbed them all, of course. But then she asked, Do you remember who your children are? I smiled wide. I have a daughter. Her name is Margot. She lives in Paris. We crochet llamas together. Jessica flushed red. You're not funny, Mom. I looked at her for a second, just long enough to let her think I remembered. Then I blinked and looked away like I didn't know who she was. Let them rush. Let them believe the time is ticking faster than it is. Because every moment they spent trying to prove I was broken was a moment I got closer to my goal. That evening, Arnold returned from his walk with Leon. He wheeled into my room, eyes sharp, and leaned close. Wardrobes in my cousin's garage, under a tarp. No one saw a thing. I exhaled so hard I nearly cried. And, he added, the contents are untouched. I told him if even a napkin goes missing, I'd sue him into the next century. He believes me. I chuckled. You're a good man, Arnold. He grunted. No, I'm just an old man who hates thieves. Then his voice dropped. But your kids, Evelyn, they're worse than thieves. They're vultures with college degrees. He wasn't wrong. Richard visited. Alone this time. He came bearing an empty smile and a half-wilted bouquet from the grocery store discount bin. Hey, Mom, he said, voice syrupy. You're looking great. Must be the pudding here. I smiled faintly. Are you my dentist? He laughed nervously. Funny. He sat by the window and started talking about how hard it was to manage my affairs. How expensive upkeep is. How good is the market right now if we sell fast? How maybe the nursing home would be better long-term. I nodded, pretending to follow. But every word he said only fueled the quiet storm building inside me. Then he slipped. He looked me dead in the eye and said, Once the deed's transferred, it'll be easier for everyone. Once the deed's transferred. They had already drafted the paperwork. That's why the lawyer was called in. They were going to petition full guardianship and initiate a property transfer, while I drooled into a bowl of soup like they expected. They were stealing my life piece by piece. But the funny thing was, they didn't know I'd already updated the deed. Walter and I had done it months before his death. And guess who the property now legally belonged to? Not Jessica. Not Richard. Not even Evelyn. It belonged to the Whitmore Charitable Trust, a non-profit Walter and I created in secret. And the moment they tried to claim ownership, the trust would freeze the property and trigger a legal review. They wouldn't see it coming. Arnold handed me a cell phone. Not a fancy one. Just a cheap flip phone wrapped in a paper towel. Leon said it's untraceable. Use it when you're ready. I stared at it for a moment. Thank you, I whispered. I didn't want to cry in front of him, but I did anyway. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. Get Tiger. Everything came crashing down. Jessica stormed into the nursing home without notice, her phone in one hand, a folder in the other. She slammed the file on my bedside table. You lied to me. I blinked, keeping the act. There's no trust. We checked the records. There's no official filing under that name in Vermont. I froze. How did they? My thoughts tripped over themselves. Did Leon mess up? Did the clerk make an error? Jessica's eyes narrowed. You've been faking it, haven't you? She pulled her phone out and showed me a video. In it, I was walking briskly to the garden 2 days ago. No shuffle. No cane. No confusion. One of the staff had recorded it. You think we're stupid, Mom? I kept silent. She moved in closer. You're going to sign over the house. You'll get a nice room, cable TV, a nurse that changes your diapers. Or we'll go public. Tell the lawyers you're unstable and a liar. I swallowed hard. That was the moment I knew. I couldn't stall anymore. I picked up the flip phone later that night, called Leon, and said the code phrase. Sunflower tea is ready. His answer was short. Then let's boil it. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the edge of my narrow bed, staring at the soft yellow wall, rubbing the brass key hidden in my nightgown hem like a worry stone. The room felt smaller, tighter, as if Jessica's threats had shrunk the air around me. They had video evidence. They knew I was pretending, but they still didn't know why, or that everything they were scrambling to steal was already out of reach. Sunlight spilled through the window. Outside, a squirrel dug desperately into the flower bed beneath the oak tree. I understood the urgency. The squirrel knew winter was coming. So did I. Arnold came into my room just after breakfast, wheeling in like a silent soldier with a plan. Leon's ready, he said, barely moving his lips. Tonight, after shift change. He'll be waiting at the rear gate in a white plumbing van. You'll have 5 minutes tops. I nodded. Once you're in, we go straight to the safe house. After that, we disappear for a while. The plan was in motion, but I didn't know I'd already been outmaneuvered. Jessica returned. Again. This time, she didn't knock. She barged into my room with 2 men in suits. One held a manila envelope. The other held a tablet. Mom, she said calmly, we're done playing games. I looked up at her with that wide-eyed "Where am I?" look I had perfected. The man with the tablet cleared his throat. Evelyn Grace Whitmore, as of this morning, a petition has been submitted for emergency guardianship on the basis of cognitive decline and suspected mental manipulation of assets. I blinked. Do you have cookies? Jessica stepped forward. Sign the consent form, and we can avoid the court hearing. You'll still have visits, your room, and everything you need. I stared at the paper, then at her. Then I laughed. Just once. A sharp, dry cackle that startled all 3 of them. Jessica stepped back. The man with the envelope frowned. I leaned forward slowly and said, Do you remember Mr. Langston? Jessica paused. Who? Our neighbor from 60 years ago. The one who fell through his roof trying to fix a satellite dish? You were 5. You laughed when he landed in the rose bushes. Jessica blinked. I leaned in closer. You don't remember, do you? She hesitated. No, but what does that? I raised an eyebrow. Then maybe you should be the one getting evaluated. They left angry, but not victorious. I slipped out of my room wearing Nurse Rita's spare scrubs and a stolen visitor badge. My hair was tied into a tight bun under a cap. Arnold wheeled himself behind me, holding a clipboard and pretending to read patient charts. The hallway was mostly empty, shift change time. We slipped past the nurse's station, turned right at the vending machine, then left toward the rear garden gate. The night air was cool and smelled like pine cleaner and cheap perfume. Leon waited by the back fence, engine idling, white van doors open. I felt adrenaline pump through me like I hadn't felt in years. Go, Arnold whispered. Run like hell. I ran. I might have been 85, but at that moment, I was 40 again, moving on pure willpower and rage. Leon helped me into the passenger seat. He slammed the doors shut and peeled off. I didn't look back. Where to now? I asked, panting. Leon grinned. To the cabin. Walter and I had a small property in New Hampshire, secluded, surrounded by woods, untouched since the 90s. It was our fallback plan, our if things go south spot. I never thought I'd need it. We drove in silence most of the night. I finally asked, You didn't open the wardrobe, right? Leon shook his head. Didn't have to. But I did move it to the basement. Too risky to leave it in the garage. I reached for his hand. Thank you. He shrugged. I trust Arnold. He said you're sharper than a broken bottle. We arrived at the cabin just after midnight. Dust hung in the air like ghosts. Everything smelled like cedar and memory. Leon carried the wardrobe down to the cellar. It looked the same. Untouched. Sacred. I opened it with the tiny brass key. Inside were the stacks of money, bond envelopes, and manila folders Walter left behind. Over $4 million. Intact. I wanted to cry, scream, and dance, but I just stood there in silence. Because this was never about the money. It was about them. What they did. What they tried to steal. I watched the news. Jessica had filed a missing person report. Richard had posted on Facebook asking people to pray for our confused mother who had wandered away from her care center. People offered sympathy. Some even blamed the staff. But none of them knew the truth. That I had outplayed them. That I had escaped the prison they tried to build around me. That the woman they labeled lost was about to teach them the cost of betrayal. But first, I had to hit them where it hurt, and that meant stepping out of the shadows. I scheduled a meeting with their lawyer, using a new name, using an old trick Walter taught me. I told them I was Evelyn's estate administrator and had some urgent papers to submit regarding an unlisted trust. They agreed. They were too greedy not to. But when I showed up in a gray wig, black sunglasses, and a voice 2 octaves deeper than mine, they had no idea it was me. I handed the papers across the mahogany table. File this immediately. The trust now owns everything. That includes the property. If any new claims surface, notify the probate court and freeze all assets for 90 days. The man nodded. And your name again, ma'am? I smiled. Call me Sunflower Tea. The legal office didn't even know what hit them. The trust papers were officially filed, stamped, and submitted. The assets were frozen. The clock was ticking. I didn't return to the cabin that night. I went somewhere better. I checked myself into a quiet little bed and breakfast near the edge of Vermont, overlooking Lake Champlain. The hostess, a young woman with warm eyes and freckles, looked at me like I was just another grandma on a weekend getaway. "I'm here to write my memoir," I told her with a wink. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't pretending. By day 101, news of the Whitmore Institute had spread far beyond Vermont. Emails poured in. Some are elderly women looking for a place to start over. Some from daughters filled with guilt. Some from lawyers wanting to donate pro bono hours. But one stood out. It came from an editor at a publishing house in New York. We saw the article, the photos, the speech at the state fair. What you did is historic. Would you consider turning your story into a book? I stared at the screen. A book. Walter had always said I had stories to tell. I just never thought anyone would care to read them. But here they were, asking me to put it all on paper. I smiled. Yes, I would. 3 weeks later, I returned to the Whitmore Institute. And when I walked through that white gate and saw the women smiling on the porch, Callie in her sunflower apron, Dolores with her tea, Edna playing cards, I knew this wasn't just a safe haven anymore. It was my legacy. Callie rushed down the steps. "Mama E!" she cried. She hugged me so tight I nearly lost my breath. "You weren't gone too long, but we missed you like crazy," she whispered. "I missed you too, sweetheart," I said. And then I whispered something only she could hear. "I'm going to write the truth. All of it." That night, I pulled out a blank notebook and started scribbling. Not about money, or trusts, or court filings, but about Walter, Dorothy, Everett, the letters, the pain, the healing. I wrote about the first time I feared my daughter, the moment I realized my son didn't love me, only my title as homeowner. And I wrote about the girls who arrived with nothing but bruises and left blooming like sunflowers. Weeks passed, then months. One by one, more women came. 2 sisters from Tennessee, a retired judge from Idaho whose children tried to fake a diagnosis, a woman who had once been a Broadway dancer, now silenced by her son's power of attorney. We welcomed them all, and each of them added a new chapter to our home. One spring morning, Callie brought in the mail. Among it, an envelope I didn't expect to see again. From Jessica. Inside, a photo. Her. A young girl. And an elderly woman. A caption written on the back. "This is Ruth. I'm caring for her now. I'm trying, Mom. I'm really trying." No letter. No apology. Just a photo. And for once, I didn't need words. I put it on the wall. Next to Walter. Next to Dorothy. Next to a new frame that said, "Healing looks different for everyone." The morning the phone rang, I was pruning the hydrangeas near the back garden. The flowers had come in early that year, bold, pink, and unapologetically large. Like the women inside. Callie rushed out onto the porch, barefoot. "Mama E," she called breathlessly, "you need to take this." I wiped my hands on my apron. "Is it Leon? Tell him the foundation cracks can wait." She shook her head. "It's Washington." I froze. "The state." "No. Washington." They patched the call through to the main hall. I sat at the old rotary phone with my hands in my lap, steady as stone. "This is Evelyn Whitmore," I said. A pause. "Mrs. Whitmore," came the voice on the other end, smooth and diplomatic. "I'm calling from the office of the First Lady. We'd like to formally invite you to speak at the National Women's Summit in D.C. next month. It would mean the world to us." I didn't respond immediately. Mostly because Callie screamed from the hallway and then dropped her tray of lemon muffins. When I did speak, my voice was soft. "Of course. I'd be honored." We spent the next 4 weeks preparing. Callie bought me a new dress. Emerald green, she insisted. It brings out your mischief. Dolores helped me write the speech. Speak from the wound, she said. That's where truth lives. And Leon, bless his stubborn soul, volunteered to drive me to D.C. himself. This country's full of people like you, he told me as we crossed the state line. They just don't know they can fight back yet. The ballroom in D.C. was massive. Crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, rows of chairs filled with journalists, senators, professors, CEOs, and grandmothers who never thought they'd be in the same room. I walked slowly to the stage, pearls around my neck, the brass wardrobe key in my pocket, and I spoke. Not just about what happened to me, but what's happening to so many of us. I spoke of guardianship abuse, of isolation, of the quiet theft of dignity. I spoke of the Institute, of Callie, of Dorothy, of Walter's final words. And then I said, I faked memory loss for 40 days so I could survive the people who claimed to love me. But in the end, that lie helped me remember exactly who I am. And who we are. There was silence. Then thunder. The applause rose like a wave. They didn't clap because I was powerful. They clapped because they saw themselves in me. After the speech, I was approached by 3 different foundations. One wanted to fund 5 new institutes. Another wanted me to help develop legislation to protect elder autonomy. And the third, a woman in a red suit who introduced herself as a senator, leaned down and whispered, "You just changed the conversation in this country." When I returned to Vermont, we had letters waiting. Hundreds. Some teenagers thanked me for giving them the courage to report abuse. Some from women in nursing homes asking if there was a Whitmore chapter in their state. Some from men. Elderly men who had lost control of their finances, their homes, their voices. "We need a place too," one wrote. "Don't forget us." I cried reading that one, because I realized we weren't done yet. Not even close. A week later, I stood at the front of the Institute during a community open house. 2 new signs had been mounted beside the porch. One read, "The Whitmore Institute for Elder Justice." The second, "And Sons." It started with a knock. Soft. Hesitant. It was nearly midnight, and the women were already asleep. Callie and Dolores were cleaning up dishes from our open porch poetry night. We had just welcomed our first male resident, Mr. Alfred Pierce, an 89-year-old jazz pianist whose son had locked him in a basement for months after gaining power of attorney. I opened the door. A man stood there, late 40s, expensive suit, tired eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. I didn't speak. I didn't like his smile. It was the kind of smile you see on the fox just before it jumps the fence. He held out a business card. Jonas Elbridge, Senior Vice President. Shoreline Consolidated Assets Group. I didn't take it. "I've heard of Shoreline," I said. "You're the ones who specialize in recovering underutilized elder estate portfolios, right?" He chuckled. "That's a very dramatic way to describe asset management." I stepped forward, cane in hand. "What do you want?" He glanced over my shoulder at the light behind me. "To warn you." I narrowed my eyes. "About." "You're stirring too much attention. Too quickly. Some of our clients are nervous. You're disrupting the system." He said system the way men in power say empire. I smiled sweetly. Good. It needed a good kick in the pants. He straightened his jacket. "We can be friends, Mrs. Whitmore. Or you can keep building homes until one of them catches fire, figuratively or literally." I slammed the door in his face. And I locked it. Twice. The next morning, we had a visitor from the press. Local news. Nice enough woman. Until she started asking if we had permits for our second annex. whether our zoning included male residents, if we had the right type of medical support on site. We've never had issues before, I said, sipping tea. Well, she said, someone filed a formal complaint. Two, actually. Anonymous. I didn't need to guess who. By week's end, 3 more things happened. Our online donation platform was frozen due to suspicious funding activity. The builder contracted for the next institute pulled out suddenly after receiving a call from his bank. Mr. Pierce received a letter saying his son had filed for legal repossession of his father. This was no longer petty revenge. This was war. Leon showed up the next day in his truck, eyes wild. I've been asking around, he said. Shorelines have connections in every state. Banks, judges, nursing homes. They make billions off legal guardianship seizures. He threw down a folder full of names. All these people lost everything. Homes, land, dignity, all signed away by family or corporate agents, and it's all legal. I opened the folder. Photos, documents, court filings, all legit, all chilling. I looked up at him. How many? Too many, he said, and they just started coming after you. That night, I gathered the residents. We sat on the porch in a circle of old blankets and brighter eyes. I told them everything. About Jonas, about Shoreline, about the pressure we were about to face. Some were afraid. Some were angry. But none of them wanted to stop. Then we fight, Dolores said. Like you fought. We tell the truth. Callie stood up, her voice shaking but her eyes steady. We'll go viral. She pulled out her phone and opened TikTok. We let the world see what happens behind closed doors. By the next week, the videos had over 2.5 million views. Clips of me telling our story. Clips of Alfred playing jazz and talking about being locked away. Clips of Dolores reading poetry about being forgotten. People started commenting. My aunt went through this too. My mom lost everything in a guardianship case. How do we help? And then came the emails. Lawyers, whistleblowers, ex-nursing home staff, bankers who had seen too many strange signings. They sent us files, paper trails, leads. I had unknowingly become the figurehead of a movement, and now we had proof. But so did Shoreline. One night, a USB stick showed up at our gate with a handwritten note. They're watching you. They recorded something. We played the file. It was a conversation between Jessica and Jonas Elbridge. She had gone to him. Give him details. She didn't just try to take my house. She was trying to erase everything I built. Callie stood beside me. What do we do now? I took a deep breath. We go public. All the way. Yes. Every file. Every name. Every dirty trick. And then, we take this to court. We called it The Reckoning. That's what Callie wrote at the top of the shared drive, holding every file, testimony, and recording we had collected. It wasn't just names anymore. It was a pattern. Dozens of elderly individuals from different states, all declared incompetent, all stripped of property, all funneled through shell companies tied to Shoreline Consolidated Assets Group. And now, they were coming for us. The day the water stopped running, I knew they weren't playing anymore. No warning. No leaks. Just dry taps and a city notice taped to our gate. Service interrupted due to zoning discrepancy and unpaid environmental assessments. Except, we didn't have any unpaid fees. Leon investigated. The city office had been flooded with complaints, anonymous, of course, alleging that the Institute's septic system was failing and contaminating local land. All false. But it was enough to give the bureaucrats an excuse. That same night, the electricity flickered. Then I failed. Twice. And a local paper, one that had ignored us for months, ran an op-ed questioning whether the Whitmore Institute is endangering seniors. I wasn't scared. I was furious. Callie turned her bedroom into a command center. Dolores began drafting op-eds with me. And I pulled out Walter's old rotary phone and called in the last favor I had. Dottie Hess. Retired. 83. Legendary. She picked up on the third ring. You always call when things are burning, she croaked. I said, well, Dottie, I need a flamethrower. 3 days later, Dottie rolled into the Institute wearing a peacoat and a hat that said, I sue bullies. She spent one day reviewing the files, then slammed her glass on the table and said, we don't just have a case. We have a class action lawsuit. We called it the EJA filing, Elder Justice Action. We filed on behalf of 48 individuals across 12 states, every one of them targeted by Shoreline's asset seizures, guardianship maneuvers, or unlawful evictions. And the lead plaintiff? Me. Evelyn Grace Whitmore. The media went wild. Headlines splashed across the news. 85-year-old grandma declares war on national elder scam ring. Elderly women build legal case that could change U.S. guardianship law. Her daughter tried to lock her away. Now she's fighting for every forgotten voice. And then came the subpoenas. One of them went to Jessica. She didn't call me. She called Leon. She begged. She cried. Then she threatened. If this goes to court, she said, I'll tell them everything. That she lied about the memory loss. That she manipulated us. That she endangered herself. Leon, bless him, only said one sentence before hanging up. You already did tell them, Jessica. That's why she's got receipts. Jessica showed up to court looking thinner. Hollow. Like shame had chewed through her spirit. I didn't look at her when I walked past. I didn't have to, because she saw the rows of women sitting behind me in that courtroom. Callie, Dolores, Alfred, Edna, Lillian, dozens more, all wearing sunflower pins. We didn't need to shout. Our presence was the volume. The judge was firm. The evidence, overwhelming. It turned out, Shoreline hadn't just been shady. They had falsified affidavits, coerced evaluations, pressured judges and social workers. It unraveled like old carpet. And when it did, federal investigators stepped in. Within a month, Shoreline was under criminal investigation. Assets frozen. Executives resigning. Properties seized. The CEO fled to the Caymans. Jonas Elbridge? He tried to deny it all, until someone leaked his recorded conversation with Jessica. He was arrested on camera. Jessica testified under oath. And at the end, she cried. Not because she lost, but because for the first time in her life, I didn't cry with her. After the verdict, the judge called me back into chambers. He handed me a sealed document. Inside, a federal grant offer to expand the Whitmore Institute across the U.S. Name it what you want, he said. I wrote 4 words at the top of the page. Sunflower Roots Initiative. Weeks passed. We broke ground in Texas, Oregon, Florida. More came. Men, women, abandoned grandparents, veterans, teachers, people who gave their lives to families and were tossed aside like unpaid bills. We gave them more than a bed. We gave them a voice. And one night, I stood on the porch again, holding a cup of sweet tea, surrounded by laughter, music, and the smell of freshly baked cornbread. Callie came beside me. Think Walter would be proud? I looked out over the lights, the gardens, the murals painted by survivors on the walls. And I said, I don't think pride is the word. I think he'll finally rest. It had been 2 years since we first opened the gate. 2 years since I pretended to forget my name, just to remember my power. 2 years since I locked eyes with my children and saw strangers. Now I looked into the faces of family every day, women and men who had been broken, buried, and bruised, yet chose to bloom anyway. The Sunflower Roots Initiative had reached 22 states. We had waiting lists, volunteer programs, a training center for legal advocates. But my hands had started to tremble. I couldn't hold a teacup steady anymore. The doctors were gentle. Advanced rheumatoid complications, they said. We'll manage the pain. I smiled politely, but deep down, I knew it was time to prepare, not for an ending, but for a handover. I called Callie to the porch one spring evening. She wore her usual sunflower apron, though now it was stained with ink from all the files she handled. Sit down, I told her. She did. I handed her a folder. Inside, all the passwords, access codes, trust documents, and a sealed envelope. You're the new director, I said. Effective immediately. Her mouth dropped. But Evelyn, no. I'm not ready. I smiled. You weren't ready to walk through that gate the night you ran away, either. And yet, here you are. She held the folder like it might crumble. I don't know if I can be you. You don't have to be me, I whispered. You just have to be louder. I made a video the next morning. Callie recorded it from the porch. I wore Walter's old sweater and my pearl brooch. I looked directly into the lens and said, if you're seeing this, I may not be here anymore. But don't be sad. I got everything I ever wanted. I was loved. I heard. I was free. And now it's your turn. Keep building. Keep blooming. Keep the sunflowers growing. The video was released 1 week later. It reached 17 million views in 48 hours. They called it the Grandmother Manifesto. Days grew shorter, nights longer, but they were filled with joy. Lillian danced on the lawn in her slippers. Dolores published her first poetry book. Mr. Pierce held jazz nights every Thursday. And Callie, she grew into a force. Strong, gentle, fierce paperwork. She stood before Congress and proposed the National Elder Autonomy Act. She marched at rallies. She became the face of a movement I had quietly begun. And I sat in the garden, wrapped in a shawl, watching sunflowers stretch toward the sky. On my last day, the porch was full. No tears, just stories. Callie brought me a small journal. Inside were notes from every resident, every state chapter, every life we'd touched. I couldn't read past page 3 before my heart felt too full. That night, I slipped into sleep with Walter's photo on my chest and Callie's hand in mine. And when I took my final breath, I did so knowing the world was a little kinder than the one I was born into. 1 month later, the President of the United States signed an executive order. April 22nd shall be recognized as Evelyn Whitmore Day, a national holiday honoring elder justice, legacy, and the quiet power of rebellion. Callie stood on the same porch years later, a little older, a little stronger. A young woman approached the gate, scared, carrying a duffel bag, just like Callie once had. Callie smiled, opened the gate wide, and said, "You're safe now, sweetheart. Welcome home."